The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Captain Marcus Chen adjusted his green beret one final time. Around him, 11 other elite soldiers prepared their gear with the methodical precision that had made them legends among Earth's military forces. They were green berets, the tip of humanity's spear, and today they would make first contact with an alien species that had been observing Earth for 3 months. The Zephyrians had arrived without fanfare, their sleek silver ships materializing in Earth's orbit like ghosts. Their initial communications were peaceful, even friendly. They claimed to represent the Galactic Confederation, a vast alliance of civilized species that spanned thousands of star systems. Earth, they said, was being considered for membership, but first, humanity needed to prove it could control its violent tendencies. Chen remembered the day Ambassador Veltar had addressed the United Nations. The tall, ethereal being with translucent blue skin had spoken in perfect English, his voice carrying an otherworldly harmony that made even the most hardened diplomats listen with rapt attention. The Galactic Confederation, he explained, had strict policies about warfare. Member species were required to disband their military forces and rely on the Confederation's peacekeeping fleet for protection. Violence is a primitive response, Veltar had said, his large silver eyes scanning the assembly. Evolved species resolve conflicts through dialogue and mutual understanding. Your military institutions are relics of a barbaric past that must be eliminated before you can join the galactic community. The politicians had eaten it up. Within weeks, pressure mounted on military leaders worldwide to begin the process of disarmament. But some, like General Harrison at Fort Bragg, remained skeptical. That's why Chen and his team were here, conducting what was officially termed a cultural exchange, but was really an intelligence-gathering mission. The Zephyrian observation post sat in a clearing 50 kilometers from the nearest human settlement. It looked more like a work of art than a military installation, flowing curves of pearl-white material that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. 3 Zephyrian vessels, each the size of a city bus, hovered silently above the structure without any visible means of propulsion. Chen's team approached the perimeter openly, following the agreed-upon protocols. They carried standard combat gear but kept their weapons lowered, magazines loaded but safeties engaged. The mission briefing had been clear: observe, assess, and report back. Under no circumstances were they to initiate hostilities. The first sign something was wrong came when Sergeant Rodriguez noticed the energy readings on his scanner. "Skipper, I'm detecting massive power buildups in those ships. Whatever they're charging, it's enough to level a city block." Chen raised his hand, signaling the team to halt. Through his binoculars, he watched as dozens of Zephyrian soldiers emerged from the installation. Unlike the graceful Ambassador Veltar, these beings wore form-fitting armor that rippled with energy fields. They moved with predatory precision, not the peaceful demeanor humanity had been led to expect. "This doesn't feel right," whispered Staff Sergeant Kim, the team's sniper. "Count at least 40 hostiles, all armed with what looked like energy weapons." Chen activated his comm unit. "Base, this is Charlie Team, requesting immediate extraction. Something's not—" The world exploded into chaos. Beams of crimson light erupted from the Zephyrian positions, cutting through the air with surgical precision. Chen threw himself behind a boulder as the energy blast vaporized a tree where he'd been standing moments before. Around him, his men scattered for cover, their years of training taking over. "Contact! Contact!" Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "We are taking heavy fire from approximately 40 enemy combatants." Chen peered around his cover and saw the truth that would change everything. The Zephyrians weren't just defending their position. They were systematically hunting his men. Their movements were coordinated, professional. This wasn't the reaction of peaceful observers. This was an ambush executed with military precision. "They were waiting for us," Chen realized with growing horror. Every detail had been planned. The cultural exchange, the remote location, even the timing. They had been lured here deliberately. Private Watson, barely 19 years old, took a direct hit to the chest. His scream was cut short as the energy beam burned through his body armor like tissue paper. Corporal Martinez tried to reach him but was forced back by concentrated fire from 3 different positions. "We need to move!" Chen shouted into his comm, "Fighting withdrawal to the extraction point." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. The Zephyrians had positioned themselves perfectly, cutting off every escape route. Their energy weapons didn't just wound, they killed instantly, leaving behind only charred remains and the acrid smell of vaporized flesh. One by one, Chen watched his brothers fall. Rodriguez took a beam to the head while providing covering fire for Kim. The sniper managed to take down 2 Zephyrians with precise shots before 3 energy blasts found him simultaneously. Martinez died trying to save Watson's body, his sense of honor overriding tactical sense. Chen found himself alone. Surrounded by the bodies of 11 of the finest soldiers humanity had ever produced. His ammunition was nearly depleted, and the Zephyrians were closing in. But instead of finishing him off, they stopped just outside effective range of his rifle. A figure approached from the alien installation, Ambassador Veltar himself, still wearing the flowing robes he'd worn at the UN, but now his silver eyes held something that made Chen's blood run cold. Not anger or hatred, but the clinical detachment of a scientist observing lab rats. "Captain Chen," Veltar's harmonious voice carried easily across the clearing. "Your species' reputation for violence appears to be well-founded. Even when outnumbered and outgunned, you fought to the death." "You murdered my men in cold blood," Chen snarled, keeping his rifle trained on the ambassador. "This was supposed to be a peaceful meeting." Veltar tilted his head, an almost curious expression crossing his features. "Murder? No, Captain. This was a test. The Galactic Confederation needed to understand the true nature of human warfare before making our final decision about your species." The words hit Chen like a physical blow. "A test? You killed 11 good men for a test?" "Good men?" Veltar stepped closer, apparently unconcerned about Chen's weapon. "Captain, these soldiers were trained killers, the most dangerous members of your most violent profession. Their elimination removes a significant threat to galactic peace." Chen's finger tightened on the trigger, but he forced himself to listen. Every word was being recorded by his suit's systems. If he somehow survived this, Command needed to know the truth. "The Confederation has observed your species for decades," Veltar continued. "We know about your wars, your weapons, your endless capacity for violence, but we also recognize your potential. Under proper guidance, humanity could become a valuable asset to galactic civilization." "What kind of guidance?" Veltar's smile was cold and predatory. "The kind that begins with the complete elimination of your military class, starting with special forces units like yours. You see, Captain, the Confederation doesn't offer membership to violent species. We offer domestication." The truth crashed over Chen like a tidal wave. There would be no membership in a galactic community of equals. The Zephyrians weren't here to uplift humanity. They were here to break it, to turn Earth's population into docile servants for their galactic empire. "You made one mistake," Chen said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "Oh, and what was that?" "You let me hear your real plan." Chen's thumb found the emergency beacon on his chest armor. The signal would punch through any jamming and reach the military satellites orbiting Earth. More importantly, it would transmit everything his suit had recorded during the ambush. Veltar's expression changed, the mask of diplomatic courtesy finally slipping away to reveal the predator beneath. "It doesn't matter, Captain. Your leaders are already convinced of our peaceful intentions. By the time they realize the truth, it will be far too late. The energy beam that ended Marcus Chen's life was swift and merciless. But his final act of defiance had already set in motion events that would shake the galaxy to its core. The beacon's signal raced through space, carrying with it the proof that humanity had been betrayed by those who claimed to come in peace. In military installations around the world, generals and admirals stared at their screens in growing horror as Chen's final transmission played out. The execution of 12 Green Berets wasn't just an act of war, it was a declaration that the alien visitors considered humanity nothing more than animals to be tamed or destroyed. General Harrison's face was carved from stone as he watched the recording for the third time. Around him, the Pentagon's crisis room had fallen silent, except for the soft hum of computers and the distant sound of someone quietly weeping for the dead soldiers. "Get me the president," Harrison said finally, his voice carrying the weight of inevitable war. "And activate the Prometheus Protocol. It's time to show these aliens what happens when you underestimate the human capacity for righteous fury." Outside, the alien ships continued their peaceful orbit of Earth, their crews confident that their demonstration had achieved its intended effect. They had no way of knowing that they had just awakened something far more dangerous than any conventional military force. They had awakened humanity's wrath. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council convened at 3 in the morning, New York time. Ambassador Veltar sat in the observers section, his serene expression unchanged, despite the tension that crackled through the air like electricity. He had no idea that every major world leader had already seen Captain Chen's final transmission, or that military commanders across the globe were quietly mobilizing their forces. President Sarah Mitchell took the podium with the measured steps of someone carrying an enormous burden. Her advisors had wanted her to reveal the truth immediately, but she understood the value of catching the enemy off guard. For now, the Zephyrians believed their deception was intact. "Ambassador Veltar," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed assembly hall. "We've received some disturbing reports from the joint training exercise yesterday. It seems there was an incident." Veltar rose gracefully, his silver eyes reflecting artificial concern. "Indeed, Madam President, I am deeply saddened to report that your soldiers initiated an unprovoked attack on our observation post. Despite our peaceful intentions, we were forced to defend ourselves." The lie hung in the air like poison. Mitchell felt her jaw clench, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. Around the room, she could see the barely controlled rage on the faces of the military representatives who had seen the true footage. "How unfortunate," Mitchell replied smoothly. "Perhaps we could review the security recordings from both sides to understand exactly what happened." For the first time, a flicker of something that might have been unease crossed Veltar's features. "I'm afraid our recording systems were damaged in the conflict. However, I can provide a detailed account." "That won't be necessary," General Harrison interrupted, stepping forward with a tablet in his hands. "We have our own recordings." The main screen in the assembly hall flickered to life, showing the crystal-clear footage from Chen's suit camera. The room watched in stunned silence as the ambush unfolded, as peaceful soldiers were systematically murdered, and as Veltar revealed the Confederation's true intentions for humanity. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Veltar's composed mask had finally cracked, revealing something alien and predatory beneath. Several delegates were openly weeping, while others stared at the ambassador with undisguised hatred. "It would seem," President Mitchell said quietly, "that we have very different definitions of the word peace." Veltar straightened, abandoning any pretense of diplomacy. "The recording proves nothing. Your species' inherent violence required a firm response. The Confederation will not be threatened by primitive warmongers." "Primitive?" General Harrison stepped forward, his weathered face hard as granite. "Ambassador, you've just declared war on a species that has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing. You have no idea what you've unleashed." The alien ambassador actually laughed. A sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "General, your entire military could not scratch the paint on a single Confederation battleship. We have conquered 1,000 worlds and brought order to countless savage species. Humanity is nothing special." What Veltar didn't know was that his words were being broadcast live to military installations around the world, where the most brilliant tactical minds in human history were already putting ancient plans into motion. For decades, science fiction writers and military strategists had speculated about alien invasion. Humanity had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone realized. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the depths of NORAD, surrounded by screens showing data streams from around the globe. As the head of the Prometheus Protocol, she had spent 15 years developing countermeasures for threats that officially didn't exist. Today, those theoretical scenarios had become terrifyingly real. "Report!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the command center. "All stealth platforms are in position," replied Colonel Anderson from his station. "The Zephyrians have no idea we've been tracking their ship movements since day one." Vasquez nodded grimly. Humanity's greatest advantage was being underestimated. The aliens saw a primitive species with crude chemical rockets and kinetic weapons. They had no concept of the ingenuity that desperation could inspire. "What's the status on Project Mjolnir?" "Railguns are charged and targeting solutions locked," Anderson reported. "We can put tungsten rods through their hulls from orbit whenever you give the word." "And the Icarus platforms?" "Nuclear pulse drives are online. Pilot volunteers are standing by." Vasquez allowed herself a cold smile. The Zephyrians thought they understood human warfare because they'd studied historical conflicts. They had no idea that humanity's greatest weapons were the ones they'd never used. The nuclear arsenals that had kept the Cold War cold were about to find a new purpose. Meanwhile, in a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, another group of humans was preparing a very different kind of weapon. Dr. James Wright, formerly of NASA's Deep Space Communications Division, hunched over banks of quantum computers that hummed with barely contained energy. "The virus is ready," he announced to the room full of cybernetics experts and former hackers who had been recruited from intelligence agencies worldwide. "If we can get it into their network, it will spread through their entire fleet within minutes." His creation was elegant in its simplicity. Human computer systems were chaotic, redundant, and inefficient by galactic standards. But that chaos made them unpredictable and incredibly difficult to counter with the clean, logical systems the Confederation used. The virus he'd designed would turn the aliens' technological superiority against them. Back in the UN Assembly Hall, Veltar was beginning to realize that the human reaction wasn't what he had expected. Instead of panic and surrender, he saw cold, calculating rage. These primitives weren't cowering. They were planning. "You will surrender your military forces immediately," he declared, his harmonious voice taking on an edge of command. "Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. The Confederation has been patient with your species, but that patience has limits." President Mitchell exchanged a glance with General Harrison before responding. "Ambassador, I'm afraid we must respectfully decline your generous offer of subjugation." "Then you have chosen extinction," Veltar said simply. He touched a device on his wrist, speaking in his own language for the first time since arriving on Earth. Above the planet, the 3 Zephyrian ships began to move. Their graceful forms shifted position, weapons ports opening like blooming flowers. Energy readings spiked as they prepared to demonstrate exactly why the Galactic Confederation had remained undefeated for millennia. What they didn't see was the cloud of objects that had been drifting in Earth's orbit for the past week, disguised as space debris and derelict satellites. The stealth platforms had been humanity's secret project for years, hidden even from most world leaders. Now they activated simultaneously, their cloaking fields dropping as they revealed their true nature. Veltar felt the first tremor of uncertainty when his ship's sensors detected massive energy signatures appearing throughout the local system. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his composure finally cracking completely. General Harrison's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "Ambassador, allow me to introduce you to Project Prometheus. You see, when you spend 70 years wondering if nuclear war will end civilization, you develop some very creative ways to deliver destructive payloads." The first railgun strike hit the lead Zephyrian vessel like the fist of an angry god. The tungsten penetrator, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, punched through the alien ship's shields and hull as if they were made of tissue paper. Atmosphere vented into space in a brilliant geyser as the ship's perfect lines crumpled like a crushed flower. "Impossible," Veltar whispered, his silver eyes wide with shock as he watched his flagship listing helplessly in orbit. "You called us primitive," Harrison continued conversationally as explosions bloomed across the screens showing orbital views. "But you failed to understand something fundamental about human nature. We don't just prepare for the wars we're fighting. We prepare for the wars we hope we'll never have to fight." The second Zephyrian ship attempted to return fire, its energy weapons lancing down toward the planet's surface. The beams struck what appeared to be empty sky and scattered harmlessly against advanced deflector shields that officially didn't exist. Humanity had been working on defensive technology for decades, inspired by everything from science fiction to pure paranoia. Meanwhile, Dr. Wright's team struck their blow. A single data packet, transmitted through quantum entanglement communicators that the Zephyrians had foolishly left unsecured, carried a payload of chaos into the heart of their fleet's computer systems. The virus spread like digital wildfire, turning the aliens' own technology into an enemy. Navigation systems began reporting false positions. Weapons refused to fire or targeted randomly. Life support systems started cycling erratically. The Confederation's perfectly ordered technology, designed to be efficient and predictable, had no defense against the beautiful chaos of human creativity. The third ship tried to retreat, its captain finally understanding that these primitives had been planning for this moment since before the first alien ship entered their solar system. But escape was impossible. The Icarus platforms, nuclear-powered interceptors that could accelerate to incredible speeds, were already in pursuit. Veltar watched his fleet die with growing horror. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. The Confederation had conquered species far more advanced than humanity. How were these savage apes defeating them? "Your technological superiority isn't based on innovation," President Mitchell explained, reading his thoughts with uncomfortable accuracy. "It's based on conformity. Every species in your Confederation uses the same systems, follows the same doctrines, thinks the same way. But humans, we've never been able to agree on anything. Our chaos is our strength." The ambassador activated his personal emergency beacon, sending a distress signal that would take months to reach the nearest Confederation outpost. But even as he called for help, he knew it wouldn't matter. The humans had just demonstrated that they could defeat Confederation technology. Once that news spread, every oppressed species in the galaxy would begin to hope. And hope, as any conqueror knows, is the most dangerous weapon of all. "This is not over," Veltar snarled, his peaceful facade completely abandoned. "The Confederation will send a fleet that will burn your world to ash." General Harrison's expression never changed. "Ambassador, I suggest you inform your superiors about what happened here today. Tell them that humanity extends the same offer to the Confederation that you extended to us." "What offer?" The general's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. "Surrender now, and we might let you live." 6 months after the Battle of Earth's orbit. As historians would later call it, the human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Admiral Sarah Chen, sister to the fallen Captain Marcus Chen, stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution and gazed at the massive Confederation staging area that sprawled across 3 moons. The Revenge fleet wasn't what anyone had expected. Instead of massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons, humanity had sent something far more dangerous. Ingenuity wrapped in determination and powered by righteous fury. 50 ships that looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen, each one a testament to human creativity unleashed by necessity. "Ma'am, we're detecting over 200 Confederation vessels," reported Commander Williams from the sensor station. "They've been waiting for us." Admiral Chen nodded grimly. The Confederation's response to their defeat at Earth had been predictable in its arrogance. They had assembled the largest battle fleet in their history, convinced that overwhelming force would succeed where subtlety had failed. They still didn't understand what they were fighting. "Signal all ships," Chen commanded. "Implement Plan Lazarus. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you execute Green Berets." The human fleet scattered, each ship taking a seemingly random trajectory through the system. To the Confederation commanders watching from their flagship, it looked like pure chaos, exactly what they expected from primitive savages who had somehow gotten lucky once. High Admiral Zextai of the Confederation Fourth Fleet was confident in his victory. His forces outnumbered the humans 4-1, and each of his ships was larger and more heavily armed than anything in the human formation. The defeat at Earth had been an embarrassing fluke, the result of overconfidence and inadequate preparation. This time, they would show no mercy. "Open fire on all human vessels," he commanded, his crystalline voice carrying across the bridge of his kilometer-long dreadnought. "Destroy them all." The space around the Confederation fleet lit up with energy weapons fire, a deadly light show that would have vaporized any conventional force. But the human ships didn't behave like conventional vessels. They twisted and danced through space in patterns that defied military logic, their courses apparently random but somehow avoiding the deadly energy beams with uncanny precision. What Zextai didn't know was that the human ships were controlled by artificial intelligence systems based on chaos theory and quantum mechanics. The AIs didn't think like organic minds or even like traditional computers. They existed in a state of controlled chaos that made their actions impossible to predict or counter. "All ships, initiate Pandora Protocol," Admiral Chen ordered as the first wave of alien fire dissipated harmlessly around her fleet. The human vessels suddenly stopped their evasive maneuvers and hung motionless in space, apparently presenting easy targets. The Confederation gunners eagerly adjusted their aim, preparing to end this battle quickly. But when their energy beams struck the human hulls, something impossible happened. The weapons fire didn't destroy the human ships. Instead, it was absorbed, stored, and redirected with interest. Each vessel had been equipped with quantum energy matrices that could capture directed energy attacks and convert them into raw power for the ship's own weapons. The harder the Confederation fleet fired, the stronger the human ships became. "Return fire," Chen said quietly. What emerged from the human ships wasn't recognizable as any known weapon technology. Streams of weaponized space-time distortion tore through the alien formations, causing ships to age centuries in seconds or trapping them in temporal loops. Gravity weapons turned the Confederation's own mass against them, creating localized black holes that consumed everything nearby. But the most devastating attack was purely psychological. The human fleet began broadcasting on all frequencies, and every transmission carried the same message, the recording of Captain Chen's final moments, played on repeat in the languages of 100 enslaved species. Throughout the Confederation fleet, Crew members who had never heard the truth about their empire's methods watched in growing horror as the execution was shown again and again. The carefully constructed lie of peaceful expansion and benevolent guidance crumbled in the face of undeniable evidence. On 17 different ships, mutinies broke out as oppressed species turned on their Confederation overlords. The proud fleet began tearing itself apart from within as decades of resentment boiled over into open rebellion. Zextai watched his formation disintegrate with growing desperation. "Jam their transmissions," he ordered. "Restore discipline immediately." But it was too late. The human virus had adapted and evolved during its 6-month dormancy, and now it spread through the Confederation's communication networks like digital wildfire. Every attempt to block the transmissions only opened new vulnerabilities for the virus to exploit. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Chen watched the chaos with grim satisfaction. "Mr. Williams, scan for any ships attempting to retreat. I want a complete record of every vessel present when they learn what happens to those who execute prisoners of war." The human fleet moved through the Confederation formation like apex predators, their weapons systematically dismantling ships that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. But they weren't simply destroying their enemies. They were liberating them. Every ship that surrendered was boarded by human marines who freed the enslaved crews and offered them a choice: join humanity's growing alliance of free species or return home with the knowledge of how to resist their oppressors. Commander Williams looked up from his station, his face pale with shock. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from over 60 Confederation vessels. They're asking for asylum." Chen smiled grimly. This was the real weapon humanity had brought to the galaxy. Not superior technology, but the radical concept that freedom was worth fighting for. The Confederation had built its empire on the assumption that most species would accept subjugation in exchange for safety and order. They had never faced an enemy that offered something better. "Grant asylum to any ship that surrenders unconditionally," Chen ordered. "But make it clear that they'll be expected to help us free others. Freedom isn't something you can just receive. It's something you have to fight for and defend." Zextai's flagship was one of the last vessels still fighting, its massive weapons firing desperately at targets that seemed to dance just out of reach. The High Admiral had realized too late that this wasn't just a military defeat. It was the beginning of the end for everything the Confederation represented. "Status report!" he demanded as another system failure cascaded through his ship's network. "Sir, we've lost contact with the 4th, 7th, and 9th battle groups," his tactical officer reported. "The humans have somehow turned our own ships against us. Our forces are in complete disarray." "Then we retreat to the core worlds and regroup," Zextai decided. "The High Command must be warned about these new human capabilities." But when he tried to activate his ship's hyperspace drive, nothing happened. The humans had been busy while his fleet was focused on the battle. Stealth infiltrator ships had attached quantum anchor devices to key vessels, preventing any escape to hyperspace. The entire Confederation force was trapped in normal space with an enemy that had just demonstrated technological superiority they hadn't known was possible. Admiral Chen's voice came through the communication system, speaking in perfect Confederation standard. "Hi, Admiral Zextai, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Space Force. I am ordering you to surrender your fleet immediately." "I will not surrender to primitives," Zextai snarled back. "Then let me clarify your situation," Chen replied calmly. "You have lost 90% of your fleet. Your remaining ships are either in rebellion or damaged beyond combat effectiveness. Your hyperspace drives have been disabled, and you are surrounded by forces that have proven capable of destroying anything you can field." She paused, letting the reality of his situation sink in. "But more importantly, High Admiral, the entire galaxy has now seen the recording of what your people did to my brother and his team. Every enslaved species in Confederation space knows that their oppressors are not the peaceful guardians they claim to be. Your empire is about to face rebellions on 1,000 worlds. Zextai felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. The Confederation's strength had always been its reputation for invincibility. No species had ever successfully resisted their expansion because none had ever believed resistance was possible. But humanity had just broadcast a very different message to the galaxy. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Unconditional surrender of all Confederation forces in this system," Chen replied. "Full disclosure of all military installations and slave worlds under your control. And a public confession from the High Command admitting their crimes against both humanity and the species they've enslaved." "The High Command will never agree to such terms." "Then we'll take our message directly to them," Chen said with deadly calm. "Admiral Zextai, you have 1 hour to decide whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Choose wisely." The communication ended, leaving the Confederation commander alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that his civilization's 1,000-year reign of terror was about to come to an end. Around him, his bridge crew watched the tactical displays showing human ships moving into position around the remaining Confederation vessels. 57 minutes later, High Admiral Zextai transmitted his unconditional surrender. The news of the Confederation fleet's destruction spread through the galaxy at the speed of light, carried by the same quantum communication networks the Empire had used to maintain control over its vast territories. But now those networks carried a very different message. Humanity had proven that the supposedly invincible Confederation could be defeated. On Rigel 7th, the enslaved Aquilians rose up against their overseers, using weapons and tactics transmitted by human cyber warfare specialists. The rebellion that followed lasted 3 days and ended with the complete liberation of the planet. In the Vega system, a coalition of 12 subjugated species declared independence and requested human military advisors to help them defend their newfound freedom. Throughout Confederation space, the carefully maintained order began to collapse, as species that had been enslaved for generations remembered what it meant to hope for something better. And at the center of it all, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship and thought about her brother Marcus and the 11 brave soldiers who had died to expose the truth about humanity's supposed alien benefactors. Their sacrifice had lit a fire that was now spreading across the galaxy, burning away the lies and oppression of an empire that had thought itself eternal. The Galactic Confederation's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating human military technology or tactics. Their fatal error had been believing that the execution of 12 Green Berets would intimidate humanity into submission. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than any weapon: the unshakable human conviction that freedom was worth any price and that some things were worth fighting for no matter the odds. The galaxy would never be the same.